And I wouldn't mind hearing from any of you who have either experienced what Rock is experiencing, and maybe share how it rings true for you. Is that okay with you, Rock? If we just kind of go through the group? Yeah. Okay. I see Neil, and I've met Neil on online, and I wonder, Neil, if you might want to just reflect on what you've heard. And I know you've been to that summit. I see it behind you. So I'm curious what you think about this, and maybe I might get Kumar and others to jump in as well.
Thank you very much, and Rakesh, an amazing story you have of life and of overcoming what challenges you have had in your past, as well as that particular one during that expedition you had. So sharing and commiserating, maybe, I often say climbing is a story of pain. And you deal with it, you compartmentalize your pain and you deal with it. I deal with it by saying it's discomfort, not pain. And I can say that if it's so painful that I can't do it, my tolerance to pain is different. And I'll deal with that hopefully later, but if I cannot, then I leave the mountain. So for example, the rib fractures that you faced, the question would be, is this pain or is this discomfort? It's something I taught my daughter at the age of 12 when we went climbing too. Is you got to tell me, like, is this pain that you're feeling in your foot? Pull the sock up. Is it gone? Okay, we're good. Or is it discomfort, and I'll deal with it later. And what I feel is you're describing, and absolutely true, is that most people don't put themselves in those positions of seeing dead bodies, for example, on a regular basis. And just kind of putting that aside to say, yeah, I've seen them before, I'll move on. And likely you've seen bodies in various conditions like you described in the operating room. So I can sense that you have that experience as well. But again, you described it as trauma instead of, okay, it's something that I can put aside and deal with and piece at later. I find that in climbing, I honestly believe it's just about how you deal with that and how you can compartmentalize it. And I think you've done a fantastic job describing your life story and how you've been able to do it. I love the way you describe that, the work-life balance. I also say that, it's important to go out, and when you're sitting on your deathbed, no one's going to ask you, hey, what would you wish you have done? And it's normally, if anyone asks you, what would you wish you have done? It's going to be, I wish I went out and traveled, or I wish I went and spent time with my family. And instead of, I wish I spent more time at work and earned a little bit more, right? So I feel that with you very vividly, and it's because of that I've spent my life climbing. It's an amazing experience, and for anybody out there that wants to do it, get out there and see the world if you can. It's amazing what your body can do. It's amazing what you can put your mind to do.
So Neil, not everyone is, so people have aspirational goals, right? And we often think, as we see Rock, I see Kumar in there, who's a Singaporean resident who I met, who took me on my very first climb, Mount Kerinci. And I said, I'm never going to do it again. This is a horrible experience. And he said, no, just wait. Give it 3 months. There's this concept of give it 3 months. As bad as you feel now, you will change. And I have changed, but I have no desire to climb what you have done, because I don't personally feel I have that mental fortitude. Let me actually, if I could, bring in Hemant Shirali. I see him here. Not everyone starts off with Everest. And I think you said there's lots of other goals. And I know this is not just about Everest. This is about, this concept of overcoming. Hemant, I wonder if you'd be comfortable. Hemant Shirali is an orthopedic surgeon working in Ontario. Hemant, could you share, to the extent you wish, to share about how this storyline for both, what you've heard from Neil and Rock particularly, how that resonates with you?
Oh, well, thank you, Mohit, for asking me this. Firstly, I would like to thank Rock. That was an amazing, splendid talk. I've been waiting for this talk ever since I read about it, and I just completely, thoroughly enjoyed it. So it does resonate a lot, Mohit. Now, Rock, I've not been at 8,000 meters or even 7,000 meters. I'm about 62. I've had a lot of medical issues in the past, and I've been an amateur climber over the last maybe 5 or 7 years. And I've done some peaks like the Island Peak and Mera Peak and Rainier and Elbrus. But being on the summit is the pleasure. I mean, that is incomparable. So for me, I think, Mohit, we talked about the comfort, about the work-life balance, and what resonated with Rock's talk was the message that should go out to all of us, a lot of us, to balance our work with our life. And I learned that very late at a very high price. Climbing actually gets us out of our comfort zone. Being at home, being in our comfortable surroundings at work, you get used to it. But every time you go on the mountains, it's like having a goal. And getting out of the comfort zone where there's pain, there's heat, there is cold, there's wind, there's hunger, tiredness, breathing issues. It's just every step you take going up to the summit or even higher. It's a feeling that you're out of your comfort zone, and that is where I like the part on the resilience that Rock was talking about. It was amazing, and I would just like to say that everybody doesn't have to climb Everest, and that's very few people can do that, but all of us have our own Everests. There's a famous mountain called Annapurna, and that was first climbed by Maurice Herzog. And what Herzog says at the end of the book is that, everybody, we all have our own Annapurnas to deal with. So you can have your goals just outside your comfort zone and train hard for that and make it happen. So it's a fantastic experience just listening to your talk, Rock, and it was amazing. So thank you very much for the talk, and congratulations again.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Let me also say that, the thing that you stated, I mean, very eloquently, and I think all three of you have said this, which is, there's a difference between saying, I will take a bit of a stretch or what we'll call risk. It's in my capability versus recklessness. And I suspect recklessness is dangerous in any part of life and whatever you do. And I think you all take the appropriate preparation. I think big mountain climbing gets romanticized largely because of big movies, and we all think we can do it. I'm very much struck by a story, and Kumaran is here. I might ask you, Kumaran, if you don't mind coming off of mute. And I remember something you told me some time ago, and just letting you know, Kumaran also has summited Everest, but it's a very weird feeling talking to all these people who have done things that I can't ever imagine myself doing. But I suspect you all share some sort of common internal genetic motivation to do so, however you do it. But I'll never forget what you said, Kumaran, and I'll let you expand on it. But I was struck by it. You said on your attempt of K2, you knew just on the hike in, you weren't going to summit. And you had that perception that the people who were walking with you were joking and talking, and you had to stop talking. And I know that feeling when I ride a bike with these 20-year-olds, and I don't know why I do that, but I do. And I realize they're chatting, and I'm thinking, chatting is not going to be a useful tool right now. I have to conserve. Tell us about that feeling, about that moment where you've got to get over something, and you can use any example you want. I was struck by that.
So, hi, Prof. I'm Kumaran from Singapore. Yeah. So what Prof was telling about is I tried K2 in 2017, and I was in the middle of my senior residency, and it's a difficult thing. One thing is climbing when you're not a resident, climbing when you are a resident, climbing when you're post residency. I think each phase of it is different, and I have managed. I've got experience of climbing before a resident and when I was a resident. And even though people say you have climbed Everest before, and it shouldn't be that difficult, but I would say that climbing during residency is much more difficult than climbing before, because there's all the requirements and responsibilities of being a resident, which you have to put aside and do training and fundraising and mentally and physically preparing yourself for the difficult climb ahead. I think that was extremely difficult, even getting yourself into the mindset to actually want to do this, and knowing that other people would have different ideas about what you actually want to do in life, whether you are serious about residency or whether you want to just, climb for the rest of your life and things like that. So that was a difficult decision to make. And when I was in June in 2017, I was on the track to K2, and it was different altogether. It's a very rugged environment. I bought new trekking shoes, and by the end of, by the time I reached base camp, it looked like it was been 3 years worn in, you know. And I knew that it's going to be very challenging. Having not climbed a 7,000 or 6,000 meter peak in almost 6 years, 5 years from Everest, the last one, I knew it was going to be difficult. And telling myself to just push on, continue, even though I knew that there was this big self-doubt, you know, Rakesh was telling about this self-doubt is always there. It's always at the back of my mind, you know, why am I doing this? What am I trying to do here? And when the rest of my colleagues and family were discouraging me from doing it, all of them are going on a path that is traveled. Why am I doing this? You know, and most likely I'm going to fail. You know, and failure does not mean just not reaching the summit. Failure might mean even dying. So that is a different aspect of failure. So that questions, that makes you question whether your definition of success and failure. You know, other people, when I came back from K2 not having summited it, I was thought to myself I was very successful for being able to survive the mountain. But everyone was like putting their hand over my shoulder and saying, it's okay, you know, it doesn't matter. You know, some of them are joking, you took 6 months off and 1 year off residency, you need to repeat a year, but you didn't summit, so, you know, it was a big deal. But for me, the success was actually coming back alive. And that brings me to another point where do we draw the line between pushing yourself to achieve something beyond what you thought you can achieve and pushing yourself to a point where that's too much for you and you die. So there's a thin line, and the more you climb, the more you realize when is it safe to actually know your limits to come back, and when you can actually push beyond your own mental boundaries, what you thought was achievable. And this comes to play every day in life, in the things that you do, and the things that you think about, what you do, the surgeries that you do, the people that you teach, the interactions and relationships that you have as well. And along the way, what made me want to climb more is not the destination, because if I knew that it was K2, the summit of K2, that was a destination, I would have done a lot more training and preparations, and maybe I would not even have engaged in it when I was a resident. But along the way, I realized that the journey was what I liked, and the destination was just a bonus, because I've climbed 4 8,000 meter peaks, and I've only submitted Everest of them, and the success rate for high mountains is very low. And I realized that, and actually it's not the summit that makes me climb, even though that summit was the one that got me into climbing. You know, the taste of success during my earlier mountains, like 5,000 meter peaks, 6,000 meter peaks, that was what kept me wanting to go, you know, building up that ego, and then knowing that you train hard, you're in control of your life, you know, if you work hard at it, you can achieve it. But the more I climbed, the more I realized that a lot of things are not in our hands, and the more I realized that this really taught me a lot of good lessons and really brought my ego down, and I really enjoyed the journey. And climbing Everest was more of the journey, and the summit was just a bonus, and I so happened to reach the summit, so I was extremely lucky. And K2, the same thing. A lot of people that were more prepared than me, but I was so lucky to just be there at that moment, to actually trek into base camp, to see K2, the massive mountain that I've only read about and saw in documentaries, there standing right there in front of me. That was an amazing moment when I saw it, and I was like, am I ever going to even, like, you know, start climbing it? And one last point, yeah. So I was climbing Everest when I was before residency, and what Rakesh was telling was how he felt like the experiences he learned from residency and from being a doctor, helping him in overcoming the difficulties when he was actually climbing the mountain. So I managed to have a different perspective of how climbing the mountain has given me more fortitude and resilience and lessons to actually handling and tackling residency. I think that's a different perspective, and it really did do me a lot of good in doing residency. And I remember when I was climbing Choyu in 2011, there was this urologist from Texas, Houston, who was in the same team as me, and he was attending, and he was quite senior. He was telling me that you know, when you get to residency, you'll find the residency would be harder than climbing a mountain. At that time, I was like, you know, I didn't know about residency, so let's go along and see how is it like. And along the way, after I climbed Everest, I was like, residency can't be this bad. And once I got to residency, I realized that yes, there are times that are worse, and it's not a short duration, like 2 months and you're at the summit of a mountain, but this is like a 6-7 year program that has its ups and downs and long hours and stretching you to to your abilities, and it's really, and I mean, his words resonate in me even till today. And we were very close. We were stuck in Camp 2 of Choyu after bad weather, and the snow was coming in. We couldn't get down. I told him that, if we survive this, I'm going to invite you for my wedding. And eventually, the weather cleared for a while, and we got down to base camp. We made it out alive, and I did invite him, and he did fly all the way from Texas all the way to Singapore just for my wedding. So mountaineering gets you close to people, even though there's just a short period of time you spend there. Like what Rakesh was telling, the group and the community that you grew up with, that they are in the same situation as you, the same shoes as you, they're going through the same journey as you, and that creates a bond unlike no other. Even though, you might know a friend for like 20 years, you might just be acquaintance to him, but that moment, just the month that you spend with them, can get you through bonds which are stronger than anything that else. Yeah.
So, Rock, I want you to maybe just reflect on what you're hearing. I mean, it seems to me that there seems to be a lot of similarities in lessons that you've learned seem to be carried in doing this sort of endeavor. And I imagine it's not just all about climbing, but you mentioned it, but how have you truly changed now? Like, what is the change that you've experienced having, and we'll use Everest as the example, but I mean, this mindset you have, what's different about you now than before?
So if the question is how am I different post-Everest than pre-Everest, I think a lot of it has to do with my overall perspective on life. I think when you are faced with death, your own, and you see other casualties around you, it really makes you question why you're living your life the way you're living your life. I feel bad for Elias because he's had to listen to me in my office. We've talked for hours about the purpose of life and the meaning of life conversations, and I know he wants to pull his hair out. But yeah, I think it's really made me view life in a different way. I know I've shared this with Elias multiple times, but this seems very obvious, but the thing I kind of got out of it is that life is a one-way street, essentially. And once you go straight, you can't go backwards. I noticed this when I was walking with my father, who is now 78 years old and not in the best of health. And I was helping him down a flight of stairs, holding his arm, right? And, I remember when I was a kid, he would help me up and down a flight of stairs. And here I am now, a guy who can summit Everest, who's helping his dad, who's pretty frail, going down the flight of stairs. Now, he would give anything to go back to where he was before and maybe change some of his experiences, but that's just not possible, right? So I want to make sure that as I go along this line, that I do things that are meaningful to me. And regardless of the cost or expense, not just financial, but also time, right? And really question what brings me meaning and value. I know this is kind of something that a lot of people in this room may not agree with, but I was really heavily involved in academic medicine, right? And I would present at meetings. And part of the reasons why I did so was because I thought it's what I was supposed to do to advance my academic career. And I enjoy parts of it, but some of it, if I truly stop and think about whether it really brought me joy and purpose, the answer is no. Instead of going to 5 meetings a year, if I go to 2 and I get a lot of value out of them and go on 3 cool trips and explore different things that I want to explore, that brings me value. And sharing time with family and friends brings me value. And I also like pushing my own personal limits. So I think more than anything else, it showed me that I want to live life in this moment to the fullest capacity possible.
Oh, I mean, I think all of us to some degree resonate with this concept of what we call a risk strategy, where you're trying to mitigate risk or regret more than anything else, like a regret minimization strategy, which is you don't want to look back on your life and say, oh, I could have, or I should have. And I think with every passing year, you have that moment. The question is, how do we prioritize things that matter? And that is hard, because I think many of us at every level, you don't have to be climbing to have that perception, and whether it's your career or your life, we all have that moment. I mean, I see some other familiar faces, and I don't know if they feel like speaking out, but I see Jay, I see Brad, see Samir, I don't know, I mean, I see a number of people, anyone welcome to provide a comment, but I don't think the concepts you're talking about are unique in any way to just those who climb. I think it's a superb mindset. And I see a lot of people waving and saying, yeah. But I don't know if anyone else wants to comment. I want to try to avoid myself as editorializing more than I'd rather hear from you.
I sincerely appreciate your talk, and the problem is, Mo, I've got too many things going on in my head and need to think about, but I think about the parallels of residency and climbing, and it's that sense of desensitization and attaining levels to cut down on the potential panic that can set in. And panic, as we know, is the thing that will burn us. If we're in a case and something starts bleeding and you panic, done. You go up to the death zone and you have a rib fracture, you panic, done. You're in a martial arts fight and you panic, you're done. My question is, and the thought process is, how do we train the resiliency that you mentioned at the end of yours? Is that a trainable thing? What are the things that we can do to allow people to become desensitized so that panic never sets in, training kicks in, and the complications, bad things don't necessarily happen, whether it be in the death zone, whether it be in surgery? Is that a trainable thing?
Yeah, I mean, if that's a question for me, I would definitely say it is a trainable thing. And I think with the right amount of support, if people are given support during certain stresses, they can be trained effectively. And in the healthcare analogy, if you're an attending and you're mentoring a resident, or if you're a senior attending mentoring a junior attending, whatever the case may be, you want to allow people to get themselves in a little bit of trouble, but just let them know that there's a safety net behind them. And I think that continual exposure to that will help develop resilience. And I'm certainly not an expert in this topic. These are just my personal opinions. But I'd be really interested to see what other people think.
Yeah, anyone else have a response to that? Building resiliency. Yeah, hi Neil.
I'll share my thoughts on that. I have trained the better part of my life as a boxer, and then thereafter I trained. What I thought I needed to do was build my shoulders and have those chiseled triceps and lats that stretch down to my hips. And I know it sounds crazy, but I just felt like that's what I had to achieve because that was the social norm of a boxer. And when I realized my bantam weight of catch weight 115 pounds and my lifetime, happy weight of about 130 pounds on any given Sunday, I'm never going to get that. I'm going to get chiseled, but I'm not going to get those big ball shoulders that I would expect a boxer to have. And I realized that maybe it's not about my massive amount of training on my body. It was way more about my training in my head. And I did a lot of different things to that effect. My boxing training, which I still jump a lot of rope and I do a lot of endurance related training, I turned that into a really unique one, which I'll jump to right now, which is I sit in of all things, a freezer filled with water. And I cool that water down to about 0 degrees. And the walls freeze. And you've probably heard the Wim Hof method. I realized later this is something that's pretty commonly done. And I sit in this, and the longest I've sat in that is for about 5 minutes. And the first time I got in, I was uncontrollably breathing. Like, I can't breathe, it's too cold. And I could not handle it. And I honestly thought I could easily do this for 2.5 minutes. My trainer was telling me, you can do this, you can do this. And no matter what he said, I couldn't last more than a minute. And I'm getting out and I'm thinking, like, all these ridiculous thoughts are in my head. Like, I'm going to bang my foot on the way out and it's going to shatter. Oh, ridiculous, just ridiculous. And when I came home after the first couple of times of that session, I realized that, you know what, it's not, I mean, what's the worst that'll happen? That tank will burst and the water will be out and I'll be free. That's the best. And the worst thing that'll happen, will I die? No, I might pass out. Well, my trainer's there. I really have this desire to exhale more than I have to inhale, just the carbon dioxide versus O2 kind of behavior. So, okay, so I'm not going to die. I'm not going to pass out. I'm going to be fine. I just need to get a grip on myself. So the next time I got in there, I sat in there for a couple of 2.5 minutes, and I was really calm. And I got back in later on for another 5 minutes. And this became a craving of this experience where you're you're hammering your body with all kinds of senses that are just going off. And how do you shut them off? Much like in your mind, all those things that are telling you can't do this, you'll fail, you won't be able to do this. And all those words of people who've told you you'll be failure or you won't succeed at something. And I go back to my like kind of calculus classes where the prof says, you know, half of you are going to fail my class kind of behavior, you know, all those thoughts in your head, like you're going to fail. And I realized that a lot of it's coming in my head, from my head, and I got to find a way to stop that. And I realized that this training where I hammer my body with all this kind of noise, but then I'm able to shut it off. That silence I feel when I submerge my head underwater as well in that moment where you can't hear much, you can't see anything because your eyes are closed, you're not breathing, you're everything in your body's tingling, but you're shutting it off so you don't feel it, is that practice that I got to say, okay, if I'm shocked, and I've been in situations where there's an avalanche happening over here and I've been able to save 2 other people's lives. I've been in a situation on the Lutze face where some guy got hit in the head with a rock and I was able to help him. And in the matter of chaos, can you pull yourself together and be useful? And I think that it requires practice. I mean, you guys have done it in your stories of residency that I hear just on this call alone, let alone some of the friends of mine. It's fascinating what you guys have survived and lived through and experienced. You can pull on that. And I feel like the difference between that and being kind of in this extreme situation on a mountain is it's happening to your body and it's happening to your senses. And it's playing that mind game with you that, you know, you're saying like, I have that rib fracture. Am I going to go? Should I go? Is that what's going on? And then you're breathing less. You're compensating because you can't take a full lung full of air. Okay, what does that? And then all the things that you've learned about, okay, I'm not pressure breathing. I'm not fully exhaling. I'm not inhaling. What are those? All those things are probably eating at you in your head. And you had to overcome that. And that's fascinating that you were able to overcome all of that, what was going on in your head, for that moment to make it there and then come back. Now, I must say, as a climber, I would have never gone at midnight to get there for 10 a.m. Or whatever time that you summited. I would be like, you know what? Another day. I'm much more of the sense of, I'll wait till everybody goes and suffers. And when I see them coming down, I have an empty view of the summit. I always go alone as much as possible. Like my cost to climb though for Everest was $13,000 US. So, I mean, it's including my permit fee. So I'm much more of a cheap butt climber than I'm going with a big company. So I conserve that. And I always say I can come back because I only spent like very little money. So I think there's different issues at play, but if you can shut that noise off in your brain, which is telling you can't do this, and that happens at work. I mean, my work is international law as it applies to law of armed conflict, humanitarian law, human rights law, and the impact of sovereignty on our nation, specifically in Canada. And I can tell you, it's not fun. It doesn't bring me joy like talking about mountaineering, and it certainly does. But it does put me in weird positions of dealing with international matters that, you're talking about, should you do something as a nation state that may cause somebody harm permanently? And those thoughts do go through your mind and they're exhausting, certainly not exhausting like you're describing, but what I'm getting at, and it's a similar capacity, but different. And no matter how much I put myself in that position, I still won't be useful on that mountain when my body is telling me to sit down. I don't know if you've talked to a boxer who's got hit in the liver. Like, I can tell you in 2 seconds, and somebody talked about fighting just a few minutes ago. Was it Brad? In a matter of 2 seconds, I can't even explain what goes on in my head, that I feel like my body's telling me, sit down, buddy. You're not doing this. Sit down. But at the same time, everything in my body's telling me to stay standing and fight. And I'm throwing a couple of punches, maybe a couple of jabs, and then all of a sudden I'm taking a knee. I wonder how many times you've seen a fighter say, oh yeah, you say, he threw the fight. He threw the fight. Just roll back the tape a little bit and see, was he punched in the body by the liver? Because if he was, that's what's going on. It took a few seconds to register and bam, he's going down and he can't control it. And that moment when you're climbing in that death zone or above 7,000 without O's even, your body's going through some wicked stuff that you're fighting in your head. And it's amazing that I commend you guys for and Kumar and like I commend you guys for being able to do stuff like that, and I'm very impressed. Well done.
Right. Thanks. Thank you very much for that, Neil. A very, very inspiring little story there. It's very cool. Can I ask folks how you're feeling right now? We're at the hour, so we're past our time, and time usually flies when you're actually engaged in a pretty meaningful discussion. And all of you, I think, have been pretty engaged. I get a general sense. Is there anybody who would like to share something either about what the impact of the presentation, or just a story, or before we close out? If not, I would leave the final statement to our keynote this evening, Rock. But I want to give anyone else a final chance. You're teetering on pressing that unmute button. Go ahead.
So Mo, I want.
Oh, okay. Go ahead, Ilias. Ilias, please.
Well, Mo, I wanted to just mention that I love Rock's story, and our offices are right next to each other, and so I covered a lot of call while he was away, for a couple months with Everest.
And you're not upset about that, no.
And all the various climbs and all that, which was nice because I'm trying to get But I wanted to mention that there's something that I had learned from you way early on that really resonated with me. And that was, instead of, it was like, I think it was a quote or something you had mentioned. And it was something about, instead of designing or having the perfect vacation, why not design or have the perfect day, And I think that we often, this work-life balance, people talk a lot about it. And I feel like it's a little bit overrated in the sense that I don't think there needs to be a clear distinction between work and life. And I think that really it all kind of comes together, I hear Rock talk about his stories of Everest and climbing. And to me, like, I'm just happy to know somebody that climbed Everest. I think that's the coolest thing, how many people know somebody personally that climbed Everest? So that's my token of accomplishment.
Well, I'm just happy to know someone who knows someone who's climbed Everest.
There you go. So,
yeah.
But I mean, that being said, like, I think that there's a tendency for people to create these divisions in life. It's like, this is my work and this is my family and this is what I really want to be doing and all that kind of stuff. And I think the real challenge is finding meaning in every moment. So a person gets up and they go to work, they're seeing patients, whatever it is, whatever work they do. And my challenge, people talk about climbing and all this. For me, it's working on my relationship, or we have 4 children now. I don't know if I told you, but all different ages. I mean, that, like, getting through a meal with them and not getting upset, and the patience does,
Samir is dying right now. Samir is dying. Samir right now is there he goes. He's after one of them. Yeah.
So the thing is that, like, it's for me, it's that's, to me, that seems like, for me, like, my, the challenge for me, and finding meaning and purpose in that, and really kind of putting it all together and as a daily thing, as opposed to separate sort of compartments. But anyways, phenomenal discussion here. So I really enjoyed it.
No, it's been very good. The one thing I recall us sitting, I know exactly where it was. We had played tennis and we were sitting around in the sun and we were just reminiscing.
I think we were having slushies.
We were having slushies. Oh, I'd have to go say that to these guys. I should have said that to these guys. Okay. Anyways, but the point was, you get to a point in your life where you say, why is it that I spent so much of my life thinking, and a sunny day, I'd say, I'm just going to try to get all my work done, so by the evening I'll be able to get out. And I'd watch multiple sunny days go by, and by the time I'd finished, Rock, you said paper, academics, the rat race, whatever it is, and I've written maybe 1,000 papers, and I could guarantee you there's 900 too many, way too many, and that's another discussion. But the point is, I sat there and I said, like, why am I prioritizing time so erroneously? The sunny days where Elias and I should be out enjoying that moment, the work will be there. And that's just a simple shift that we've done. And I've tried to live as much as I possibly can, through that approach. That being said, I want to make sure that, I think, Yad, you had a statement, and I think Jenna has a comment as well. So, okay, so let's go with Yad first.
Sorry, I actually didn't have anything to say, but
Okay.
I
Well,
will say that
now you will say something because
I
I've
will
called
say
you
that
out. Yeah.
I absolutely love this conversation. I think it was like I just came back from a walk with my dog and I was thinking the same thing. Like, have I spent this summer working inside more than being outside and enjoying and doing stuff that I find a ton of mental peace from? But I will end this by saying that I just think from everyone talking, it's like growth comes from chaos. And I think that's the one thing that I just kept hearing over and over again, is that we go through these pivotal moments and we figure out a way to grow from them. So thank you to putting this together, and to Rock, thank you for sharing your story.
Right. Thank you. Jenna, I think you had a comment. Is that right?
I actually had a question for
Oh,
Rob.
sure. Yeah, please.
Circling back to a topic that he touched on earlier, but he mentioned focusing on breathing as one of his coping strategies whenever he encounters stressors, whether that be on the mountain facing death or in the operating room. But interestingly enough, when he was on top of the mountain, his coping mechanism was completely ripped from him. So I was wondering, you know, in those situations where you can't fall back on your training or your coping mechanisms, how did you overcome that, and how do you face that in regular day life when you're at the hospital or you're training or you're on the mountain or in another stressful situation?
I think that's a great question, Jenna. And so the other day I was waiting for my case to go, and we were super inefficient, and there were delays for about 2 hours. And I went in my office and I focused on 4-7-8 breathing so I wouldn't kill anyone downstairs in the operating room. So I think breathing is one of these fundamental things that I try to focus on. But I think you quickly learn in surgery and in life that if plan A isn't working, you have to resort to plan B and plan C. And I think I mentioned to you, Jenna, before in the past, that I think that's what distinguishes a okay surgeon from a really great surgeon, your ability to improvise and to shift from plan A to plan B to plan C. And ironically, I think that this is something that I learned from climbing and I've applied to my medical career, similar to your story from applying your climbing to residency. Yeah, so when I can't breathe or can't take deep breaths and can't do 4-7-8 breathing, I can slow down my breathing. I can really zone in on the problem at hand. And as was mentioned earlier, I can think through what's the worst case scenario and how can I get out of it. So I think separating your emotional reaction from logic is something that's really useful in times of stress. I know it's easier said than done, but with practice, I think that's something that you can get to. And it's super applicable to being in a mountain or any scenario, including being at work in the operating room.
Superb. Any last takers on a comment? Jay, you're just looking at me like you're literally at the center of my screen and you're smiling. I'm gonna get you to unmute. Can you unmute? Okay.
Yes. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, we can.
You know, I'm just gonna say something super duper short. First of all, Rock, that was an incredible talk. Every single one of you has spoken or have climbed a mountain. I am very, very impressed. Okay, I'll say a few things. So Mo got me into mountain biking. He has this infectious quality about him, you know, when you're around him. So
COVID-like, you're saying, right? It's horrible.
COVID-like, yeah.
Right, yeah.
So Sunday morning, I get up at 6 a.m. I do meditate every morning. And then I'm talking to my wife afterwards, and I'm like, oh God, I'm going for a bike ride with the guys. They're going to kill me. And because one of the guys who rides, Dave Wilson, he does this thing called Fire Pit, and I've never climbed that thing. I guess that's my Everest. Anyways, I ended up with a different bike that day, and it was spectacular. So I think what you talk a lot about is this phenomenon of concentration in many ways, right? So, you know, you get hit with some stressor, whatever that stressor is. And I like Brad's analogy of fighting because, you know, he does a lot of it and it's kind of cool. And I guess I wish I could do it, but I don't do it. But I guess it's just that focus, that concentration, and kind of like what happened to you, Rock, right? With that fractured rib up on the mountain. You have some kind of, or everyone has this ability to concentrate in some way, their mind, their thoughts, or to whittle it down to something very elemental. Anyways, that's that. And then the last thing is, in many ways, you're talking about paths, right? So, I do the odd Instagram post, and I had posted something on December 31st of one year about, which path are you going to choose? And then Mo responds in the typical Mo way, whatever path you choose is the right path. So I guess that's really it, right? It's what you guys are saying. Live your life to what you want, what feeds you. And I think that's pretty awesome. And thank you so much for this. This was spectacular. Thanks.
Thank you, Jay. All right. I think that's everyone.
Prof, can I just add like a very short comment?
Please.
Kumar here. Yeah. So like how Rakesh actually takes a breathe before he starts his cases or when something goes wrong, and applies that on the mountain, takes a deep breath before he starts climbing. I've learned to do that in residency, literally. So when things face me during the mountains, and I take a deep breath and overcome that and move on. And in residency, when things are much less complicated, I mean, when life and death hangs on the line in the mountains, but in residency, when you make things complicated yourself, but actually things aren't that complicated, and you know that you have done this before, and you have done this many times before, you just lose confidence at that moment. So you just need to recompose yourself, take a step back, take a breather, and carry on. So I think we'll leave that with Prof. You were saying that you can't imagine yourself, or you don't have the mental fortitude to actually climb. But I think you have gone through a lot more than us in residency, in your career, in publishing, and all these things. I think you have more than what it takes to climb a mountain. So next time I'm going climbing, I'm going to take you along with me.
see, this is where bad things happen. But I appreciate your thing. Well, appreciate that. I've been trying to close it, but we don't have to. I just make sure that everyone gets a chance to truly speak if they have something they wanted to share with the group. I know pretty well most people have, and I don't want to pressure anyone. So if anyone else has any closing comments, you're good. On that note, I would like to ask Rox maybe to make maybe a closing statement, if you wouldn't mind. And again, just echoing, I think, from all of us, and the purpose of these small group events, people questioned initially, said, why aren't you letting hundreds in? Lots of people would sign up and it would become a webinar. And the dream I had, quite frankly, when we were doing, because we're halfway through a 24 event, 4-night sort of series, has been that you're going to get moments like this, just like this. So what we've had tonight, where you're going to get a chance to really have a meaningful discussion that would not have happened over chat, and a discussion that would not have, I hope, for you as a speaker and those of you who are attending, felt as connected to each other as we have. So I'm just grateful for the fact that we had this group of people decided to spend an hour with us this evening. So to all of you, a huge, huge heartfelt thank you for sharing your stories and certainly being part of this. And I'll leave you with the last word, Rock.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me to this forum today. And thanks for everybody for spending over an hour on this chat. I don't think I have anything big and profound to say, except for when you're living your life and you're making decisions as to what you want to do, really question why you're doing everything. Are you doing it because you have to? Or are you doing it because it's a sense of obligation? Or are you doing it because you really enjoy it? And do things you enjoy. And the one other thing I'd leave you with is put yourself in uncomfortable situations. I think we have gotten used to being comfortable. And kind of stretch your boundaries and test things out and try them out. And I think that's the only way to learn kind of what speaks to you and what path you want to take.
And I think, as I've learned, when in doubt, take a big, deep breath and know it's going to be okay.
Yeah.
On that note, everyone, have a wonderful evening, afternoon.